I'm Dan Weiss, President and CEO of the Metropolitan Museum of Art, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to our program, People, a global dialogue on museums and their publics. I am privileged to be speaking to you from Lenape-Hoking, homeland of the Lenape diaspora and a dwelling place for many diverse indigenous peoples. Over the last year, interactions between museums and the public have shifted dramatically in response to the ongoing pandemic and international calls for social and racial justice, contributing to an ever-expanding dialogue about how museums engage with people. In this three-day series of conversations, we'll hear from an international array of scholars, artists, writers, performers, and activists as they share their ideas about how museums engage with people locally and globally. Our mission at the Met is to engage our audiences, diverse, extraordinarily international, in ways that allow us to connect our collections and our work with all who have an interest in what the museum does. And this convening will give us an opportunity to reflect very carefully about all of that. Contributing to our program is an extraordinary group of over 20 outstanding individuals from around the world. It's important for us as an institution to open up this space for conversation and to take a step back and listen. We hope that over the next 3 days, we can learn, be inspired, and reflect on the ideas and proposals that are shared with us throughout the program. This program is made possible by the Giorgio S. Sacerdote Fund and the Samuel H. Kress Foundation. And I'd like to thank them for their generous support and for helping us bring these important conversations to light. It is now my pleasure to introduce my colleague, Max Holein, who will share more about the program. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Max Holein, the Marina Kellen French Director of the Metropolitan Museum of Art. I'm delighted to welcome you to this important dialogue on the relationship between museums and people. I'd also like to tell you more about our exciting program and how it will unfold in the next 3 days. So over the course of 5 dynamic sessions and a culminating keynote address, we'll hear from many highly respected individuals, from thought leaders and engaged participants in this discussion from all over the world. They will share their thoughts, concerns, and ideas on how museums can connect with people. While connecting with people is at the very basis of what we are and why the museum was founded, it is a concept that is, of course, essential to museums and their practice. So what we do to connect, how we do it, and what we connect people with has taken on new meaning and urgency for sure over the last year when the pandemic has forced us to literally distance ourselves from our public, and for many of us to close our doors as museums for substantial periods of time. As we reopen and in many ways reinvent our work, the timing could not be better suited to host a dialogue on this fundamental purpose. Our program is organized into 5 sessions: Redefining Narratives, Interpretation, Past and Present, Race and Identity, and Community Partnership. These 5 topics have never been as urgent and fundamental as this past year during the pandemic, in addition to a national reckoning with racial injustice that exposed inequalities and drove commitments to immediate and long-term change. The opportunities in front of us are large. For sure, the challenges of our present time are complex, but every day we see the responsibilities that cultural institutions have to people, along with the importance of the issues that we all together can address. So as we expand the vision of who we want to be, we ask ourselves how we can further evolve the museum from a docent to a convener, to be more in service of and in dialogue with both the local and global communities. How can we best display and contextualize our collections and engage in complex conversations and narratives that indeed foster cross-cultural connections and make space for multiple, even divergent or dissenting perspectives? In this context, we look forward to hearing our participants share their thoughts on these timely topics over the next few days. But we also look forward to hearing from you, the public in attendance, as you respond to or are inspired by the conversation here today and in the next days. So I'm now delighted to introduce Heidi Holder, the Frederick P. and Sandra P. Rose Chair of Education, to introduce our first session and share more on how you can engage in our discussion.
Hello to everyone joining us from all over the world. I'm Heidi Holder, the Frederick P. and Sandra P. Rose Chair of Education at the Met. I'm delighted to welcome you to the first session of People, a global dialogue on museums and their publics. I'd like to reiterate our tremendous gratitude to the funders of this conversation, Bonnie Sacerdote, through the Giorgio S. Sacerdote Fund and the Samuel H. Kress Foundation. We're immensely grateful for their support in this endeavor at the Met. People, a global dialogue on museums and their publics, was developed and is being presented by the Education Department in collaboration with our colleagues across the Met and an external advisory committee. The ongoing pandemic and its economic and social ruptures have shifted museum public interactions to online and socially distanced engagement and has transformed the role of museums in civic society. These shifts and activities have occurred within the context of international protests to end anti-Black racism and create more just societies. Art and cultural organizations are key players in this work. All art and cultural acts and dialogues are with and about people. Our conversations over the next 3 days bring together presenters from across the globe to offer different perspectives, including case studies, scholarship, performance, narratives, and other phenomena on engaging with people in museum settings, outside the museum, in communities, and in virtual settings, and others. Often, in these kinds of dialogues, institutional experts share scholarship and experiences on working with people outward to the public. This is a conversation between people, a conversation that aims to shift the center of the institutional people discourse. Institution as student rather than teacher, institution as listener rather than speaker, institution as respondent rather than presenter. We hope you'll join us for all 5 of the convening sessions, each of which will feature a series of presentations followed by a panel discussion with the session speakers. Throughout the convening, we hope that you'll use the chat during the presentations and during the panel discussions. Our hope is that these presentations are catalysts for discussion and that you'll join us in that conversation by participating in the chat with questions and comments. We are also offering closed captioning. You can turn closed captioning on or off by using the CC icon toward the bottom right of your Zoom toolbar. For each of the 5 sessions in this program, we'll be approaching our session topics through open-ended questions rather than preset descriptions to open up space for conversation. These questions are just starting points for participants' presentations that can take us into many directions. Our first session, Redefining Narratives, asks how museums might shift their frameworks and modes of presentation to respond to current events and the shifting awareness of our audiences. We'll also consider how institutions can engage with previously excluded voices to tell the stories of objects and their contexts. Finally, how museums can expand their scope of expertise beyond the curatorial framework. I'm thrilled to introduce the speakers for this session. Elizabeth Colomba is a representational artist living in New York City and is of Martinican descent, born and raised in France. While drawing inspiration from old masters, she generates space for her subjects to inhabit the rewriting of history. She analyzes the construction of identity and tangled interrelationships in our collective identity today. Karina Gardner is Senior Curator of Design and Digital at the Victoria and Albert Museum, where she leads the museum's Rapid Response Collecting program. Karina's research focuses on contemporary product and digital design and the role they play in society, and current projects include the new permanent gallery for 20th and 21st century design. Alison Glenn is a curator and writer interested in furthering access and equity through the cultivation of inclusive art histories. She is currently the Associate Curator of Contemporary Art at the Crystal Bridges Museum of American Art. Mariana Valencia is a choreographer and performer. Her solo work moves through dance and language. She is a recipient of a Bessie for Outstanding Breakthrough Choreographer, a Foundation for Contemporary Arts Award to Artists, and was a 2019 Whitney Biennial Artist. She looks forward to sharing space safely again. The session will be moderated by Hrag Vartanian, the editor-in-chief and co-founder of Hyperallergic. Hrag is an art critic, curator, artist, and lecturer on contemporary art with expertise on the intersection of art and politics. It's my pleasure to hand over to our session participants. Let's listen, let's talk. Thank you.
Hello, it's really very brilliant to be here. Let me just share my screen and let's get going. It's an absolute honour to open what promises to be a fascinating panel discussion and indeed conference. Thank you. I'm here to talk about rapid response collecting, a term first coined in 2014 at the V&A in London, when we were tasked with thinking afresh about the role design plays in contemporary society. From the outset, rapid response has been a way of collecting that looks out to the world, to objects, and design things that are the subject of public conversation and debate. 6 years in, and unimagined to all, we are living in a changed world. What does this mean for the work of a contemporary curator, for museums, their collections, and their publics? My talk this evening, or this afternoon indeed for you, is in 3 parts. It's a brief introduction to rapid response collecting, its context and its reaction, and then what this last year has meant, and perhaps what's next. The now near 50 objects we have acquired as part of the rapid response collecting programme include a range of Christian Louboutin high-heeled shoes in ethnically diverse shades of nude, luxury goods that speak to a shifting global economy, a set of anti-homeless spikes that discourage resting and sleeping, and that ask questions about the use of public space and who has a say. The Lego Research Institute, the first figurine set in the toy maker's 82-year history to feature women in a non-gendered professional setting. Say hello to an astronomer, a paleontologist, and a chemist. A set of stamps that mark a shift from underground subculture to Finnish national hero. A set of 3D printed handlebars, which through their means of manufacture, redrew the rules of competitive cycling. A WeChat-enabled soft toy, marketed to parents as a way to communicate with their children when working away from home. For us, an object of rapid urbanisation and the communities left behind. A Vote Leave campaign leaflet from the 2016 EU referendum that made use of the UK National Health Service graphic identity to mislead. A full-body swimming costume designed to encourage women wanting to dress modestly into sports, and which became a symbol of national identity politics, with women fined and in some cases banned from wearing the garment on the beaches of Europe. A British high street fashion campaign speaking out about immigration at a time when so many are made to feel unwelcome. A design for public health that reaches through its technology, through language and across language barriers, to warn of the arrival of the deadliest animal on Earth. A visual identity, digitally distributed, created under the rubric of Do It Together, that gave a visual cohesion to a global call for climate action. And a shoe with a carbon fibre plate that enabled the first 2-hour marathon. By now, you may very well be asking, what do these disparate, at times modest objects have in common? What is their relationship to contemporary design? And what place do they have in a museum? And in particular, the V&A, in some ways a place not so dissimilar from the Met, best known for its grand galleries and fine collections of decorative arts, as well as, of course, glamorous exhibitions. Here you see Dior, pre-pandemic. To come again, back to the specifics of rapid response collecting. From the beginning, it has been always a small display within this bigger institutional picture. Yet beyond the walls of the museum, it has consistently punched well above its weight. Why is this the case? We took a lead from the founding mission of the museum, which was to be a place of learning for all, for makers, for manufacturers and consumers. Rapid response collecting is a call to action. we determinedly reach beyond an authorial model and an interest in the professions out to the world, to objects that are the subject of popular and critical conversation. Our every intent is in expanding the definition of design to enfranchise new technologies, new modes of practice and manufacture, and to embrace things otherwise often considered undesigned. All that we do is done in public. Each new acquisition is put on immediate display. We make clear why the object has been acquired at a given moment in time and when it entered the museum. Anyone is invited to suggest objects for acquisition. By looking closely, together, we seek to address the big questions we face as a society today. Since starting in 2014, we've received considerable coverage. This has ranged from the surprised through to the outraged. Here, the author is suggesting it is merely about clickbait collecting or clickbait curating, implying that responsiveness leads to a lack of rigour, or perhaps more worryingly, it is too unlike what has properly gone before. Change is cast as a lessening of standards. But my question is, whose standards? This is what we need to be asking. This sustained interest, this interest has been sustained over its 6-year run, or the practice to date. Yes, this is clearly because the objects are often newsworthy, but it is also because rapid response collecting puts at question what is design today, and to note I'm a curator of design, so hence that emphasis, but also what is it to collect, and what role can and should museums play in the 21st century, the subject that brings us all together today. When the pandemic struck early last year, in collecting terms, the V&A was in some way prepared. It was a preparedness that I had never imagined, but rapid response was an established mode of reactive curatorial practice. The period of furlough aside, we have sought to observe and listen with keen interest, to look to objects that are likely to be of sustained importance beyond the mere headline, beyond that clickbait, and that through their design enable us to come together to probe the contemporary moment, and to do so sensitively, to act responsibly, and to be kind, to foster relationships and amplify the voices of those that we engage with. And I do think it's important to note that the pandemic is, as again our panel conversation and also the broader conference makes clear, is only one of the real challenges that this last year has brought to the fore. Social and racial injustice are as much part of this programme as the pandemic. Examples of objects we have or we are seeking to acquire include a bottom-up, community-driven solution for a ventilator mask that showed the possibilities of design as an agent of change from holiday object to the hospital bed. We've also sought to bring into the museum a roll of melt-blown fabric essential to medical-grade PPE. Many have collected masks. This is the material that makes that mask safe. In extreme demand last year, this life-saving material, first designed in the 1950s, became more valuable than steel, copper, silver, and gold by weight. The last of the objects, or penultimate of those that I will discuss, is a set of 3D printed door openers to fit over existing door handles that enable people to open them with their arms rather than their hands, thereby reducing the spread of the virus. Beyond minimising contamination, these door openers also threw light on the lived experience of disabled people. Newly shared challenges, newly visible, felt, shared, collective, broadened challenges gave new voice, much needed new voice to communities, otherwise less seen, less enabled by others to be vocal. We've also acquired the British Vogue issue from July 2020. It's a set of magazine cover images that call out the radical shift in attitudes to the value of work and those who do it. These are images that make visual our new reckoning with social and racial injustice. Taking stock of rapid response acquisitions made to date prompts a series of observations. These diverse objects of design stand as evidence of social, political, manufacturing, and economic change. In what we do as contemporary curators, we forge a record of our time. But whose time? Museums show themselves in what they acquire, and it is imperative that we ask ourselves, what can and must we do to enable a broader constituency to engage in a critical debate about design things, about the world around us and our place within it? How can we open ourselves up and take new and distributed forms of need and expertise seriously? And how can we better enfranchise our users and publics? One way is to advocate for the power of the polyphonic collection and to see the outlook or attitude of something like rapid response collecting across wider museum activities. At the V&A, the 2018 exhibition, The Future Starts Here, which looked at design's role in shaping our collective tomorrow, is one such example. Look to the pussy hat, our rapid response object, telling the story in public. Here in London, we are currently in the final throes of installing our new Design 1900 to Now galleries. Please do forgive the hasty installation shots, but I hope that they will still communicate the point. These new displays look to design as a tool for understanding the way we live together and invite audiences to ask questions about the past, present, and future. In this section, Shaping Ourselves, the past is energized by the present. The Louboutin Nudes and the Lego Research Institute are now part of the wider collection and are here set alongside a cup and saucer bearing the emblem of the Women's Social and Political Union, which campaigned for women's right to vote in the early 20th century, and The New Woman, the booklet that you can see at the centre, which calls for a radical reform of women's dress in the late 1920s. As you can perhaps just about see, short hair was the order of the day, trousers over dresses. And in Sustainability and Subversion, the present is informed by the past. The two posters you see here call out poor labour and agricultural practice and for an end to racial discrimination. Both are rapid response collecting objects of their time. They are much earlier in period than the programme itself, but they are also rapid response objects of today, in the sense that they speak to the contemporary moment and a desire to be heard. Our aim with this new gallery is to be broad, international, and inclusive. This is an ever ongoing task as collections are shaped over time by the priorities of those who create them. Today, rapid response collecting and a determination to recognise new and diverse expertise and meaning making in our acquisitions practice are part of it. But the work of these galleries properly starts when we open our doors. Our every effort must be to engage our visitors in person and online, to listen to their reactions and to welcome their suggestions for change and for the collection. Radicality sits in the collection. The activist artists Bob and Roberta Smith consistently makes the point that museum audiences should look like taxpayers. We can do this better in how we acquire. But for this to really change, and as or more importantly, museum staff must look like taxpayers. As curators, we are cultural listeners. This was Hello Barbie, a children's toy designed to come alive, make that dream of the childhood come true, to speak and interact. But it was also found to be listening in this sense, in a sinister manner. But that close interrogation is what this image is in some ways to put forward. So to come back, as curators, we are cultural listeners. We need to go out to the world, to look, to listen, and to act. In doing so, in this moment of change, museums and their collections, past and present, become relevant again and again. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. I am Mariana Valencia. I'm a choreographer and performer, and I'm going to speak through some current concepts that I've been working with in my work. I make performances and I perform in them. Generally, they're solo works. And I will start with reading to you my kind of like statement, and then I'll move forward to some images, and then we're going to hear a little bit of the script from my last performance, which will be kind of like a deconstructed interpretation of what the performance looks like on the whole. My drive in performance making is to invite audiences to listen, feel, disagree, and empathize. They rise up to the occasion as layers of ideas overlap and spark, and everyone ruminates within the smoke and afterglow, hopefully. Performance is my archive. It is both the container of who I am and what I see, and the modality through which I'm communicated. I'm a solo performer and a choreographer. My performances are a compound of dance and text, and my subjects are both marginal and popular, depicting the mundaneness of the everyday. I help others see all of this with me as I perform through it. My work juxtaposes humor and gravity, speech and movement, song and silence to create character and world. My work takes an accessible essayist form in which I move between subjects and movement qualities, inviting the audience to relate to both my mind and my body. My highly specific point of view is presented through a conversational style, functioning as an entry point through which audiences learn about themselves as they learn about me. Okay, so in my most recent performance, well, one of the recent performances I've made, it's called Solo B. It was actually supposed to be a live performance, and then the pandemic happened, so it became a video performance. But essentially, the essence of the performance was supposed to be looking at classical sculpture and pre-Columbian sculpture as it relates to some, like, the history of my mother, basically. Like, it was like, I was like, I'm going to connect all these things, and this is how I'm going to connect them. I was interested in all these subjects, and as my work goes, I tend to find these bridges through cross disciplines and also through subjects. So that's what was happening. And so the pre-Columbian sculptures that I was first interested in were like made of jade, and they seemed so accessible to me. They looked like real body, like our bodies look like now. And so I started going from their positionings and creating choreography through those positions of their imagery. And so part of my process is that I just grab references from the internet and also museums and things like this. And through a lot of ethnographic research and these images are actually from the internet, but a lot of these types of sculptures or figures are found at like the Museum of Anthropology in Mexico City, etc. So like there's a lot of these in the world in museums that I have encountered in person. If you can see here, these are in positions that to me really encounter kind of like the positions of my body through space and time. And so what I did for this choreography was string these together, and they're not very, it's not like a very, like I'm moving from this position to that, to that, to that, but more using like the sensibility of these kind of characters. I find these to be very like softened kind of like images of people. And these these sculptures of people are like so ancient, and yet we were like that then. And that depiction to me was what spoke to me for this project. And juxtaposing those to the very perfect kind of like classical interpretation of humanity and humans in more like classical sculpture. I'm not saying one's better than the other. What I'm saying is that they are different, and to me, this one's more relatable. Yeah, it's like not like a sculpture competition in my mind. It's just putting one next to the other and saying this is what they speak to me. This is what they say to me when they speak, and frankly, I'm more like the other one. Part of the script here that I'm going to share kind of goes through those notions and also some other ones. Because like I said, this work was about classical, pre-Columbian, and also sculpture, and also the history of my mother's life. The history of my mother's life, my Guatemalan mother. So it's like we're going for, and something about people who live in the caves in Sacromonte, Spain. So go with me on this journey as I read through this. So the broken state. Classical sculptures are often broken. Often these sculptures have broken over millennia. You've seen them before. They occasionally have a missing hand, foot, nose, head, ear, or they might just be a hand, a foot, a nose, a head, an ear. The remains of these classical sculptures are proof that they were once complete, perfect. The Western tradition of classical sculpture began in ancient Greece. A classical sculpture of a person was made by a person. A classical sculpture of a person cannot heal its own losses or ruptures. A restorer of sculptures can repair a broken sculpture close to its original form. A rupture is difficult to heal. When a spleen breaks, it must be removed. When a bone breaks, it can heal over time. The human body has the ability to heal its fractures and its wounds. Physical and psychological specialists can help mend ruptures, fractures, and wounds. These specialists are external aids to the body. The actual healing comes from within the body. A psychological rupture heals by redistributing its effect with a reasonable and objective viewfinder that renders the rupture into a new shape. Thereafter, a psychological rupture stops aching from a singular place. The damage is spread, an even sensation of resolve. Bones, organs, muscles, blood, nerves, fat, flesh. My mother was injured in an accident this year. A broken tooth, shoulder, hip, fibula, and ankle on the left, a broken tooth and wrist on the right. Since the accident, I've compared my mother's broken body in its temporary state to that of classical sculptures. Helen and Ileana. When I imagine my mother's life during the years before I was born, before she was my mother, I tend to no longer see my mother. Rather, I see stages of a person as a child, an adolescent, and as a woman without a child. My mother's name is Ileana. Helen is the Greek name for Ileana. Helen of Troy is an ancient woman. Helen of Troy is also physically unknown to me. Ileana means Helen in Romanian. Romania was once home to the largest Romani population in Eastern Europe. The Roma are often called gypsies because there's a misconception that the Roma came from Egypt, but it's not true, and the name took hold anyway. The Roma actually originated in northern India. The Roma are a nomadic people who have suffered from systemic prejudice for centuries. The Roma nomadic lifestyle has helped them survive persecution and exile. The Roma nomadic lifestyle defines them untethered, without a nation to call home. The Roma are often perceived as uncivilized. It's quite civilized or even sophisticated to honor one's body as a home. We arrive with a body and take it with us when we die. Our bodies are our homes. When I feel sadness, I respond with humor. On my map, sadness lives next to humor. Humor and sadness have a door between their houses where they can move back and forth all day, all night. Sadness, humor, sadness, humor, sadness, humor, sadness, humor, all day, all night. To help this picture form for you, I suggest you imagine those magical doors in hotel rooms where suddenly you're in your best friend's room. It would be absolutely perfect to be in my best friend Lydia's room and for Lydia to suddenly be in mine. Entrances and exits are expected and unexpected all day, all night. To help this picture form for you, you might also try envisioning my relationship to sadness and humor as a basket of petals, and I'm the 4-year-old flower girl who clumsily but purposefully shares the petals with the floor. I throw fistfuls of petals into the air with the hope that they will fly, and then gravity hits and they fall. Into the air and down, into the air and down, into the air and down, again and again, air down. I once lived in a cave in Sacromonte, Spain. Sacromonte is a Roma town that overlooks the city of Granada. The Roma from the Sacromonte caves preserve the flamenco traditions of the region, a tradition that's preserved by passing down movement from one body to another. At night, women make percussive sounds with their bodies. Their voices echo on the hillside. It's the kind of sound that makes my body find its womb. It's as if something I didn't know I was missing has been returned to me. Sleeping in a cave is alarmingly silent, and if a sound is made, the sound is very clear. It's shockingly dark to sleep in a cave, yet once my eyes acclimate to the darkness, I can see different strengths of velvety light, like when I close my eyes and face the sun, or when I close my eyes and shield them with my palm, there's still light. Even in the solid presence of darkness, stubborn and resilient light tones survive. In the distance, women make sounds. Helen is a heroic tale of war. She made a sound. When my mother tells stories about her life before I was born, they sound like heroic tales too. They sound heroic mainly because they're about a person I never knew. And though my mother might be a hero, the person she was before she was my mother is a different hero. Pre-Columbian means before Columbus. Pre-Columbian sculptures are also ancient, and they too have missing parts. Pre-Columbian sculptures look more like the shapes they are today. They just do. Pre-Columbian sculptures look more like the shapes we are today. They just do. Pre-Columbian sculptures were shaped and framed with the qualities of modern humans. They're not classically shaped, but their humanity is a closer rendering to what I understand as people, connected somehow to the earth with wobbly edges, soft tones, expression, and delight. Not delight like a cherub, rather human delight, like when I open my favorite bag of chips and devour their flavor. This entire dance echoes the shapes of some pre-Columbian figures. The movement and the title are in Spanglish, and I call them solo beat. I once saw a dance where the choreographer read the Genesis story out loud. She sat in the audience and the dancers performed cycles of movements, beautiful cycles, simple movements, athletic costumes. If those dancers were classical sculptures, and if only their hands, feet, noses, heads, or ears were left of their sculptures, they would absolutely be preserved because they render a type of body that is classically considered in a Western view perfect or able. Thank you.
Hello, and depending on where you're joining us from, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening. My name is Alison Glenn, and I'm going to share an exhibition called Promise, Witness, Remembrance that is currently on view at the Speed Art Museum in Louisville, Kentucky.
As a city struggling to respond, to grieve, to react, to move forward, following the killing of Breonna Taylor, other deaths that followed, a year of protests, an enormous spike in gun violence across the city and the country. This exhibit from the beginning has represented our attempt, like what would it look like for a museum to try to serve a city going through what Louisville's been going through, to try to serve our country at a time of need.
When you walk into the museum, into the galleries, on your sightline, you see the portrait of Breonna Taylor painted by Amy Sherald. It's the only thing you see. If you've come to the museum to just see that painting, you know exactly where to find it. If you want to engage with the exhibition as a concept, you can also do that. So the intention with this placement was to make the portrait accessible, to make people feel comfortable, to know where they were intending to go, to also understand the importance of this exhibition in relationship to the story of Breonna Taylor. The title Promise, Witness, Remembrance was developed from a conversation I had with Tamika Palmer when I asked her what this exhibition could do for her and represent for her daughter's legacy. It was also important to understand that this exhibition was meant to connect the local to the national. So when I first started on this journey, I knew where the painting was going to end up. I knew that it was going to be co-acquired by the Smithsonian and by the Speed Museum. And so I looked pointedly to how I could start that conversation between the local and national throughout the exhibition, thinking about promise, so the sections, the artworks, artists.
Oh, say, can you see by freedom's clear light?
The first section is promise, which is the promise of a nation and the symbols that the promise is meant to afford its citizens. Key things like national anthems, flags, voting rights, and the military that uphold them are what artists and artworks in this section look at. Hank Willis Thomas has the two works, the flags that are flanking the doors, and each star represents a person killed by gun violence in the United States in the year that they represent.
Your liberty's dying.
The next section, Witness, thinks not only about the curatorial framework, but also about visitors to the museum. I anticipate many will be first-time visitors. So this portion of the exhibition really unpacks what artists do. Artists help us understand the contemporary moment. And in this section, I've paired historical works with more contemporary ones to tell a larger story about witnessing and sometimes protesting. The Muffled Drums is one of the first protests or marches for Black lives in the United States. And it was organized by the NAACP. And then the protest photographs of Louisville, focusing on historic, contemporary, timely but enduring. Remembrance is a section that looks at artworks that have been created to honor those lost to gun violence and or police brutality and their legacies. The exhibition was developed in conversation with many key constituents. I initially developed a national panel of advisors to guide the conversation from the onset. These people come from very different walks of life. They've all experienced gun violence and or police brutality, either in their families or communities, or stand in solidarity. I spent a lot of time listening to the Louisville Steering Committee and also the team at the Speed Museum. And from these conversations, alongside listening to Tamika Palmer, is how the curatorial framework developed.
I'm hoping that this type of work, this type of co-creation, where we've worked with community has had a voice, not just a superficial voice, but a really in-depth autonomy as of the outcome that happens. I'm hoping that that becomes a new model, that institutions learn from us, that this can happen. You can work with community and make programming and exhibitions together.
So at the Speed, our mission is to invite everyone to celebrate art forever. So consistent with that, and also because of the nature of this exhibit, everything about it is free. Admission, parking, we want this to be extremely accessible for a lot of reasons. One, no one should be making money off of this experience, and we aren't. But even more so, we want everyone to come through this exhibit together.
Every visitor is going to be different. I'm going to have a different experience because I'm a Black woman. I'm at the heart of things that are happening here, so I experience it as first person. But if you have not been at the heart of what has happened here, taking that in and really understanding someone else's truth, right, through their voice, through their eyes is important, but also really reflecting on your place in that, right? Have you been supportive of this movement? Has it been a little intimidating or frightening at some points? And really examining kind of how we can move forward together.
I think one of the most remarkable things about this exhibition is that it happened over such a short period of time. And it's important to talk about how we got here. So we got to this place over 4 months because of a very intense collaborative process. And I want to kind of talk through how that unfolded in this presentation, and then I'm happy to ask questions when we're at the end in the Q&A. So when I was brought on board, I first met with the Speed Museum team, and I realized how great the ambition for this exhibition was across the museum. And I knew that I would have to begin to prioritize all of the key stakeholders. And so to do that, I first spoke with Tamika Palmer, who is Breonna Taylor's mother. And I asked her pointedly what this exhibition could mean to her and her daughter's legacy. And I'm going to read her reply. Quote, "This exhibition will continue to do what Bree has always done for us, and that is to continue to bring people together. Only this time, people are wanting to learn her story and to continue to stand for her and even celebrate some on how she changed the world." And then her mom gave me kind of 3 parameters or 3 ideas of how I could begin to develop a conversation around the story of Breonna Taylor. The first one is the mark that she left upon all of us. The second one was the struggles we went and are continuing to go through to get justice for her. And the final one was the laws and policies that were changed because of the injustice that she experienced. And so from those 3 statements, I developed the curatorial framework of Promise, Witness, Remembrance. Due to the timeline and nature of this exhibition, I knew that I would need a cabinet of advisors to work very closely with. So I began to develop a national panel of advisors who could help to guide and provide feedback on the development of the curatorial framework. I'm going to just briefly share why I chose these people. Mecca Brooks is senior strategist in Hank Willis Thomas's studio. Theaster Gates successfully worked with the Tamir Rice Foundation and Samaria Rice in relocating the gazebo from the Tamir Rice was murdered at from Cleveland, Ohio to Chicago, Illinois. John Cesare Goff is a filmmaker who was also touched by the white supremacist shooting at the Mother Emanuel AME Church in Charleston, South Carolina, and he made a film about the work. Raymond Green is Alton Sterling's cousin. He is not in the art world. Lakeisha Leak works for the MacArthur Foundation, and she is Trayvon Martin's cousin. Hank Willis Thomas, for the better part of 20 years, has made work about the loss of his cousin Songa to gun violence. Amy Sherrill, it goes without saying, painted the iconic portrait. And Dr. Allison K. Young is an art historian who teaches at LSU, who looks at art of the global South and makes very meaningful connections to the American South. It wouldn't have been possible at all to realize this exhibition without the support of community engagement. And the woman pictured here on the bottom right is Toya Northington. She's the community engagement strategist at the Speed Art Museum. Toya assembled 3 different committees, and the one that I met with most directly was the Louisville Steering Committee. That included Breonna Taylor's sister and Breonna Taylor's aunt. And so I worked very closely with her mother to develop the curatorial framework and then brought ideas forward to community members and other family members to gain critical feedback and insight. One of the things that was very interesting in this pandemic moment was that I was only able to travel to Louisville one time before installation. So I'm based in Bentonville, Arkansas, and either it wasn't safe or the weather wasn't good enough for me to travel. And one of the key points that the steering committee gave me when I first presented my proposal was, where are the local artists? And I really challenged myself to think about, okay, this is the largest museum in Kentucky. It's an encyclopedic institution, but we're also talking about this moment. And so I challenged them back and said, I'd really love to think about the protest photographs. Can you all help me? Because I can't conduct studio visits like I normally would. Can you all put together a list of photographers that you'd like me to consider to be included in the exhibition? And so they put together a group of a very long list, and it was a very non-traditional curatorial approach, but nothing about this exhibition was traditional. So essentially, Promise, Witness, Remembrance is an intergenerational group of 23 artists working across media. So it included, and it was important to me to include internationally recognized artists from the Speed Museum's collection, such as Sam Gilliam, Lorna Simpson, and Ed Hamilton, alongside a combination of loans and new works by Amy Sherrill, Rashid Johnson, Hank Willis Thomas, Glenn Lagan, Maria Magdalena Campos Pons, Bethany Collins, Carrie James Marshall, Nick Cave, and more. There were a total of 36 objects, 23 artists, And as I mentioned, 5 works were from the Speed collection, 8 artists are from Louisville. There were 5 new works and 1 site-specific work. It was very important to me that sightlines remained thought of throughout the entirety of the exhibition. So as we know, museums themselves are entirely inaccessible. And for someone who perhaps doesn't go to museums very often, they can feel intimidating, institutional, and people don't know how to act in these spaces, so they don't come to museums. And I knew that this exhibition would bring a lot of first-time museum goers. So it was very important to me that the minute that you walked into the entrance, you could see where you were going. And if you were interested in just seeing the portrait of Breonna Taylor, you could make your way there. This is the image that met you on right before you entered the glass bridge, and Breonna stayed on the sightline throughout the entirety of the exhibition. One thing that was also really important was this use of the drape, this kind of languid falling of Hank Willis Thomas's Falling Stars to drive home the impact of gun violence in the United States. And in this particular instance, this flag is from 2020. Again, we moved into the second gallery and you still see Breonna Taylor on your sightline. The Louisville Steering Committee was also very interested in or challenged the idea that artists would be coming from outside of the city to be in conversation with the idea of an exhibition around Breonna Taylor's life. And so one of the strategies I used was to incorporate Alicia Wormsley's work, which is the text that is running just below the wainscoting in these galleries. And the way that this text operates is that if an institution or a curator decides to use it, the artist also asks them to invite local artists to reply. So we were able to invite 5 artists to reply to the statement, "There are Black people in the future." And that is something that is going to be handled by the Louisville Steering Committee. Another really interesting fact about this exhibition is Sam Gilliam's Carousel Form 2, which you see on the right of your screen. This is the first time that this work was actually hung in the round. And it was really important to me that this tapestry and this painting take up space, but also that people would feel comfortable experiencing the relationship that their body has to this draped abstract canvas and understand what it meant for Sam Gilliam in 1969 to take up space as an artist. Here are images of the 7 photographs from 5 Louisville-based photographers. They're telling Breonna's story was also about telling the story of the protests. And there's one posthumous exhibition of a photograph created by Tyler Girth, who was shot and killed while documenting the protests. There's also an image by John Cherry of Travis Najdi, and Travis was a young man who was leading the protest movement and was shot and killed in an unrelated incident, and he was only 21. So really, again, trying to find a way to make people feel visible, to make people feel seen and heard, to provide an opportunity to make connections to the local and the national through artworks, objects, and ideas. Here's another image of the second gallery. Another strategy that I used was paint color. So I collaborated with in a lot of non-traditional ways, and collaborating with Tamika Palmer, I really wanted to bring out some ideas of Breonna and who she was as a person. And so I asked her what Breonna's favorite colors were, and she said Kentucky blue and purple. And so we decided to have a transitional wall color that led you into the room with the portrait. This color here is a purple black. It's called Galaxy Black, and it's another way to think about making a portrait to someone or paying homage to someone in a way that is perhaps not as direct or representational. And wall colors are a very easy thing. Another image of the second gallery. And another. An image if you're standing in the fourth gallery, which is the Remembrance section, which includes a very sparse grouping of artworks that have been made that pay homage to people that have been lost to gun violence and or police brutality in the United States. And then, of course, the portrait. The final and most important thing that I want to talk about is the timeline that Tamika Palmer wrote. So early on in the exhibition development, I also presented my proposal to her for the exhibition. And I wanted to have a timeline that would connect the galleries throughout. And I said, you know, it's very clear to me that I'm not the person to write this timeline, and we had been speaking with museum employees about, and staff about who might be the right person in Louisville to write this. And Ms. Palmer just said, I'll write it. And this is arguably one of the most successful visual and visible moments of collaboration with her. It's very touching. I didn't edit it outside of copy edits. And there was a conversation during installation about perhaps including a label so that we could contextualize what was happening in the galleries. And ultimately, I knew that we didn't need, as a curatorial team, as a representative of an institution, we didn't need to be the authoritative voice in that space. And what I want to leave you with today is the idea that decentering actually means decentering. It means giving the space. And so to choose to not have a label, to unpack what was happening in the galleries with the timeline, was a radical decentering of not only the Speed Museum as the authoritative and authorial voice in that space, but me as a curator. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. Well, I would like to thank everybody to be here and also to thank the Met for having me. I'm going to start by presenting myself. I'm Elizabeth Colomba, and I'm a visual artist living in New York City and working in New York City. And let me give you a little bit of background of what I do. So my practice revolves around the idea of using the same language as old masters, using their techniques and their themes, and including Black bodies into a history they were either shut off or not presented or dehumanized, and not presented in a human world proper way. And what I do is I have different themes, again, echoing what painting we're doing, I would say, from the 17th century to the maybe 19th century, which roughly will be at the same time as when the slave trade started and stopped. So it covers a bit of that time. And I use mythology, either Greek or Roman, feminine sacred, which is essentially religious story. Allegory could be anything from a way of representing ideas in imagery, and history is when I find out about Black characters who marked their time but have been ignored, or their story hasn't been told in a way, and I'd like to shed lights on who they were and what they did. So then I basically use portraiture to put them forward. So here, this is a bit of the process that I use, which is, again, the same idea of echoing the tropes of old masters. So I start with a grisaille, so it's basically black and white, and I layer color, and I think it's a good way, a technical good way to bring depth to color, and again, using the same language and really reclaiming a space, a history in the visual arts. I would like to add that my background is I'm French, and my parents are coming from Martinique. So in a way, it's also how to bridge those two cultures together in this space. And let me see, there's another one here. And also echoing different type of paintings. So obviously this one has been influenced by old masters, and still echoing a lot of the Caribbeans by using detailing, like in this one, for example, the fabric. And the way I came about to do work this way, basically presenting Black bodies, and essentially female Black bodies, in a space like this to reclaim again their power, is the first time. I had my art education in Paris, and I think the first time I noticed that I was not noticing any kind of Black representation in institution was at the Museum of the Louvre, when I first encountered a portrait called The Portrait of a Negresse by Guillaume Benoit, portrait of the 18th century, just after the French Revolution. And the fact that I noticed that it was there made me realize that it was not anywhere else. So then I wanted to really explore the idea of representing the Black body in that language, in that visual language, using iconography. So in this one, I'm going to focus on one because I feel I'm not going to make time. So this one, I'm going to talk about the one on the left, which is Daphne. So it's so the mythology of Daphne, I'm going to try to make it short, is the story of a nymph and who was it comes from basically a fight between Cupid and Apollo, who wanted to prove to each other who was the best one. And of course, unfortunately, as many stories, the woman was a bit a way of proving their masculinity. So Cupid decided to hit Apollo with an arrow to prove that his power of love was stronger, and that the first person he will encounter, he would fall incredibly in love with her. And he decided to hit Daphne with a lead arrow. So then the first person she will encounter or see, she would absolutely be disgusted by. So, of course, the story is that the two meet and they obviously cannot get along. So she starts to flee and she runs away from him and he pursues her relentlessly. And the minute he's going to grab her, she prays to her father, the river of God, the god of a river. And he changes her into a laurel. So that's why she's represented in the background with this beautiful laurel tree and gold leaf and all that. But what I thought was interesting is when I take a story like this, is that I like to, in a way, reclaim the power of the female, because she's always in mythology or any kind of story like this, she's always the victim or she's never the one who has a say. And I thought it would be interesting for her to confront the aggressor. So you see at the bottom behind the wall, you see a shadow coming in, which will be the imagery of Apollo, and she has an arrow in her hand. And I feel like she's gonna confront whoever's gonna come, and whatever may come from that confrontation, she will take it. She will not flee, and she will not ask for help. So it's a way of telling the same story, the same myth, using the same tropes, same iconography, but really we use the Black female power in that painting. So let me get to the next one. So in this one, the Feminine Sacred is just two paintings. So the one on the left is a representation of the Virgin Mary before she becomes the Virgin Mary, just on the way to, I guess, the Annunciation before. So in the scriptures, she's described as this young girl who's going to be, is going to see the angel Gabriel and then become the Virgin Mary. But I will focus the attention on the other one, the Denial of St. Peter. So the Denial of St. Peter, so again, using that same language. So usually when you see a woman wearing blue and red, in the Western civilization, she is the Virgin Mary. So that's why she is dressed that way. And the Denial of St. Peter is a reference to a story in the Bible that I'm going to tell the best way I can shortly. Is when is the Last Supper. Christ told St. Peter, "You will deny my name before dawn or before the rooster crow 3 times." And of course, St. Peter at the dinner, he said, "Absolutely no way, I will follow you until the end of time, blah, blah, blah," right? But the thing is that, when Christ was arrested and people start to recognize him, he denied knowing him 3 times. And then the rooster crowed, and then he realized that, the prophecy that Christ made became true, which, yes. So this story here, the depiction of it, it's a bit of a story, but again, it's reclaiming that story. So you see in the back, you have 3 frames, and one is empty, and the 2 other ones represent, the one in the middle is a presentation of Rembrandt, which also painting St. Peter in denial, when he denied to the servant that he knew Christ. And the third one is a presentation of the painting of de la Tour, who painted St. Peter when he was repenting. And I left the first one empty because it's like the story didn't begin. And she's basically holding in her hand the rooster that she oh my God, 5 minutes already? Okay. So that she represents the rooster that she killed. So then for her, it's a way for her son not to be killed and reclaim the story of Christ and Peter. It's reclaiming that power of female and being able to not only reclaim the space, her story and her narrative. So let me breeze through the other one. So this another way that I do also is to find out about characters that mark their time, and you make a portrait because very few images of them exist. And I like to really represent them as if at the time people recognize their value and what they brought to the world at that moment and what kind of portraiture they would have had at the time. So this one is me. Biddy Mason is an incredible woman born into slavery, managed to became a millionaire and own what is the equivalent of today's downtown LA, and was able to resell everything and became an incredible entrepreneur. The Chevalier de Saint-Georges on the right was nicknamed the Black Mozart, but it was interesting that he was before Mozart. So actually Mozart should be called the White Chevalier de Saint-Georges. And Chevalier de Saint-Georges is an incredible musician if you don't know his symphonies, please listen to them. It's very similar to Mozart, you will see. I'm gonna breeze through, some slides here. So here we have the 4 seasons. You have, some 2 behind me. So it's a suite that is parallel to the ages of women. So it's also the cycle of life. And usually it's represented with men, so it's the ages of men. But I just thought it would be interesting, since women, give birth, that would be very logical to do. The ages of women and then the cycle of life represented by women and all the seasons. And I'm gonna show this one here. So there was an interesting moment. So they were shown into this place at the Elms, mentioned in Newport. For those who don't know, really, Newport is a very interesting town. And to give you an example on the Elms, a beautiful mansion, and down the road, there's another mansion that was built by the Vanderbilt, which at the time cost 11 million. It was made of like marble brought back from Italy. It would be impossible to build it today. So it just give you an idea of what the neighborhood was. And then we did this intervention where we hang up the suite of the 4 seasons in this place during this exhibition. And it was incredible. There was nothing to be done. They just hang them perfectly. So it looked like they were part of that show forever. So people came in and people were a bit puzzled, not only to find these grand black figures, just in an environment that would never be accepted in. And they were either questioning, puzzlement, or bewilderment, or, some of them were surprised happily, and some of them just said, well, we didn't know black people were here in Newport at the beginning of the 19th century. So it's interesting to have this kind of work in an institution and to make this kind of intervention, certainly with my type of practice, just because we can have interesting conversation with existing work. I also did that in in another pop-up exhibition at the Park Avenue Armory, which also was, it's an institution which comes from military, and you have mainly portraits of white men, powerful white men. And all of a sudden we decided, and the curator was Deborah Willis, decided to intervene and put some of my work beside and next to these men. And it was incredible also the response of the audience to some of them were questioning, of course, the presence of Black bodies in this environment precisely, but some of them were just thought it was absolutely natural. So I think it speaks volumes when you can have work that definitely can redefine how people can be perceived and redefine how they see subject matters. And I think that's it. So thank you very much.
Great, fantastic. Thank you everyone for your presentations. I think it was such a great breadth of material around this topic. And I think it'll be a really interesting conversation. One of the things I noticed was two of you are artists that are sort of redefining narratives in their own way, while two of you are curators. And I wanted to ask a little bit about that question about what does it mean? First, I'll start with the artists. So Mariana and Elizabeth, both of you, in some ways, you're working with redefining narratives, which is naturally what artists do sometimes. But at the same time, you're working in institutional settings. So I'm wondering, what are those challenges that you're dealing with when you're redefining narratives, as opposed to doing an archival type of curatorial project? Like, what are those challenges and what are the advantages, perhaps? Mariana, would you like to start, or Elizabeth, either of you?
Either or.
Yeah, go ahead, Elizabeth. Okay.
Or yeah, Elizabeth, you go.
With my work, I think, well, it depends a lot on the curator and however they want to proceed and what the story they want to tell. Because obviously, my work is quite specific, right? So it really revolves into plunging in the past and really reconciliate with the present. And it depends also what reaction you want to get from somebody who's not really used to see Black bodies in this kind of space. And if they see it in this kind of space, certainly taking that space without any excuses or apologies. So my challenge would be to find curators maybe to be able to tell that story more than anything, but my work is going to be the same, I would say. Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that. I find that when I'm talking, I guess when I started redefining narrative and my narrative and many other narratives, I came from the place of seeing that my narrative was often, or narratives I'm in proximity to are often omitted. And this is a huge part of our conversations now, but I think when I began doing this, it wasn't so much in the front. So it was a little bit like, well, I'm not written into history. So like, how am I supposed to reference what history is about me? You know, like what? And so I was like, oh, I know how to do this. I'll write my own. So the first time I proposed that to it was like a presenter. It was for a residency. They're like, it wasn't so much that my content was unheard of. It was more, but how will you do it? Through dance. And I was like, well, it's going to be like songs and talking and dancing and visual and props and, you know, but it's not a play and it's not a musical. And they were like, we just fear that this might not be translated. And I was like, you don't know what I'm talking about because it doesn't exist. So let me try. And this is the continuation of that trying. I feel like that's my main relationship to redefining narrative.
A beautiful answer. Thank you. Elizabeth, I noticed in your instance, you often seem to smuggle the museum into your artwork, meaning like there are other paintings, there are material objects. In some ways, you're sort of doing that. Well, Mariana, you know, in your case, it's sort of an interesting in that, like in the history of performance, museums doesn't archive performance historically very well, or hasn't, right? So you're actually dealing with sort of a lack of that history in a way in part of the archive. So I wonder whether each of you could speak a little bit to that, to those different aspects. So like Elizabeth, in your case, do you feel the need to sort of create your own context within the artwork in some ways?
Well, yeah, I mean, when you see my paintings, also a collage of many things. There's a lot of archives from museum just because I kind of recreate a parallel history, and I'm references cues in the work so people can understand that it's coming from an existing place, but also because you haven't seen again characters like that in the space, you also understand that it's not really real. So I need that the objects references to cue people in. And it's definitely an important part of my work. And a lot of the work I actually reference is at the Met, by the way. So thank you guys. But I really love it because I learn a lot, but also there's so much history also behind objects. So even in an object that could be like a simple dress, for example, I did one painting with, is at the Met, by the way. And it's the floor work is obviously floor work on roses and things like that. And for me, I reclaim that dress and put different prints of flowers from the Caribbean, so it looks like the same shape. So you are again recognizing something from an era, but for me, I can shift it to really tell the story I want to tell. So,
Yeah.
Mariana?
I think generally performance is very difficult to archive because you can't obtain it, and it is fleeting, and it is always fugitive, and it is forever an experience for the performer and the person experiencing it. So yes, museums don't archive performance. I can barely archive my own performance. It's not an archive. It's like an anemic rendering of the idea of what happened in real time. Like, it's like, I can't really get there. I can't get it back. It's like law. It's like once it's happened, it's gone. And perhaps that's why performance is its own thing. And also this is why performance can't be capitalized on, because like you can't have it. It's the most resistant. A moving body is like the most, and like this is also meta, like a body that is active and living can resist. And so that's what the body of work of a choreographer offers as well.
Great. So Karina, I'm going to move to you because I think something Marina said that really I think is important. It was this idea of when something is fleeting. Your project is kind of the opposite, where you're taking these rapid response, this sort of trying to capture something that has a certain, maybe a cultural moment or a cultural relevance in that. First of all, my first question is, why did this start in 2014? Was there an event that sort of pushed this project to begin? And second of all, as a curator, how would you respond to these sort of fleeting moments and understanding why some of them need to be preserved?
Thank you. 2014 is less interesting than it might be. The V&A is the world's first design museum, and our collections departments are by medium, by type, and don't reflect contemporary practice. So it was a reckoning to think, what is practice of today? And we as a new team were brought to the institution. There were 120 curators at the time, many of whom were very, very brilliant at their jobs. So what do? You look beyond the chairs and pots to a degree. So how do we capture that fleeting moment? And it's interesting reflecting on the conversations across the panel and having that wonderful opportunity to hear from the artists themselves. The object's acquisition is about holding on to something, to preserve it for posterity. Performance is hard. The digital is hard also. But objects in the collection don't stand still. yes, for rapid response collecting, we seek to capture a particular moment in time, but in writing those contemporary histories, it's vital that the breadth of those objects and their lived experience in the world is brought with us into the collection so that they can become polyphonic in that sense and be used and applied in different ways. I might choose to show an object in one particular way, but the richness of museum collections is that they then become the objects, the ideas, the things of display of others in the immediate. That's both the conversation with a visitor, but then also as we pass forward into time and a curator, an artist, a member of the public comes to that object again, as we've seen in the work that we've been talking about just now.
So I'm going to add a question from those listening. Robin Owen asked the question, do you think the V&A would deaccession some of these items as their significance perhaps is reevaluated over time? And I think this is a big question, deaccessioning in general, but I think in this case, is that part of the conversation at all?
To a degree, yes. And another way of phrasing it might be those objects that get away, and for the good reasons and the bad. And the best example that I can speak to in terms of rapid response is the hard drives and computers, the physical objects that the Guardian newspaper held here in the UK with the leaked files from Edward Snowden. There was this absolutely apocryphal moment when those computers were destroyed by the intelligence services in the car park of the newspaper, in full knowledge that those digital files were held elsewhere. For me as a curator, that object, that physical, that iconoclastic damage to the object was about the contest for the control of the digital realm, our new public square. Those objects immediately spoke to me as a digital curator, but also as a curator of design, their everyday consumer electronics. Initially, the Guardian was like, why do you want our broken computers? Of course you can have them. But then as these objects began to resonate, it became more complex. It also became more complex because government funds museums. This was a government issue. But over time, the Guardian archive themselves realized they may be physical, these objects. They're not our traditional acquisition or retention. And so they said no. My disappointment was vast, but the recognition is that that object sits best and most comfortably in the history archive of that newspaper. You can negotiate though, those objects come back on loan. So it's not deaccessioning in that sense, but we were never able to accession. And that's where that balance and compete of interest and investment needs to be transparent and open and serve the best interests broadly as opposed to institutionally or individually.
Thank you. Now, Alison, in your case, I think a number of people have been, the questions we've been getting in the chat, one of the dominant questions is people's asking what the audience response has been to the exhibition. I wonder if you could address that first before we continue.
Sure, absolutely. Thank you. And thank you to all the panelists. The presentations were phenomenal. You know, there's different metrics that the Speed has been using to track responses. And one of them is a simple interpretation moment with these cards that are perhaps maybe this big, you know, and there's a few prompts. So they are based on the exhibition. So the question is, you know, what is your promise, or what have you witnessed, or what do you remember? And I'm loosely paraphrasing the prompts, obviously. And guests are invited to write a response at the end of the exhibition. And so that's one way that is quite traditional way for collecting metrics and audience response. The second one has been social media. You know, there are people that are on Instagram and who will take photographs and post it and tag me or tag the Speed Museum or tag Toya Northington or Stephen Riley or any of the larger kind of national panel or community steering committees. And that's a way that the digital has really been amplified. And then of course, you know, and I should probably step back and say, there's so many audiences and so many publics that we're serving with this exhibition. And one thing that I've realized in the process of this is that when you step outside of a traditional curatorial methodology, your measures of success exist beyond commonly held registers. So this is an accumulation of different ways that success might perhaps be, or audience response might be garnered. And so there are many different ways. And also just, media, right? There's been quite an interest from news outlets. So that's more the kind of the audiences that we're used to in the art world. And so those are kind of three different ways that we've been able to accumulate and assess audience engagement. But there's a couple of really important ones. One has been Tamika Palmer and Breonna Taylor's family, and the response that they've had, which has been really wonderful. And then the protest community. So the first day that we were open to the public, there were members of the protest community that came to the museum, and it was really wonderful to take photographs with them, to stand with them while they pointed out different moments in the protests. As someone who was not there, but also knows that this is a key constituency and a key audience, is really remarkable. So I hope it's not too lengthy of an answer. There's
not at all.
Kind of those are some of the ways.
That's great. And I pick up on that point. One of the things that really interested me in your project, or in your curatorial project, Alison, is in the case of Breonna Taylor, there's been such a prominent media narrative, right? At the same time as now a museum show is sort of engaging with those narratives. And I'm wondering, how much were those narratives informing the way you wanted to change possibly, or shift the narrative? Or where were you looking to in order to find the narratives you wanted to build upon? Because some of these can be sometimes conflicting, of course, because there have been so many narratives about Breonna Taylor. And by putting it in a museum, it is about taking a position often. So I'd love if you can address that a little bit.
That's a great question. When I first embarked on this process, I reread everything that I possibly could, just to understand perception, to your point, of these different narratives in media and the different ways that she was portrayed. And, the information that I received in Arkansas is very different than what you might have received in New York, and what was happening for Karina in London and, in Louisville, because these media outlets all have different ways of representing a place or speaking of and to a place. But what was paramount was making sure that I aligned with the narrative that Tamika Palmer was, helping guide me through. And it became very clear early on that there would be so many competing priorities and so many competing stakeholders. And one of the early conversations I had with Theaster Gates, who's someone I had the opportunity to work with in a few different capacities, when I first took this on, I called him and I was like, let's talk. You successfully did this with Samaria Rice and the Tamir Rice Foundation, and essentially rescued, or perhaps stepped in at a moment when an institution was unable to respond in a way that they thought they could in Cleveland. And he reminded me that no matter what, at the end of the day, Tamika Palmer was always going to be the most important voice in the room. And so it was less about understanding other lenses, or through other lenses, how people came to know the story of Breonna Taylor. And it was most important to understand through the eyes of her mother and her family who she was.
Great. I thought one of the interesting things both you and Mariana talked about was taking up space. Part of the piece, the Sam Gilliam piece, I have to say, the way it's exhibited, it's hard for me to believe that it wasn't shown that way in the round, because it seems like a natural way to do this. Now, what did it perhaps teach you about the work itself, and some of the things that were being perhaps overlooked, or maybe the context for a lot of this work wasn't given a proper context perhaps? And I'm wondering if there were any surprises in that for you, Alison.
In the Sam Gilliam specifically?
Or in general? I'm just using that as one example that you highlighted.
Sure. Well, I think it's a great one to answer your question. I really found it, at the risk of sounding, simple, I found it magnificent to be able to walk around and experience that painting more sculpturally. And, there was and is an element of hope, perhaps. There's an idea of just really getting lost in the folds, of being overwhelmed by the scale, by the color, Also thinking about, this was an intentional curatorial gesture because 50 years prior, this painting was on the cover of Art in America with an accompanying article, something like, what is the state of Black art in America, right? And this was late 60s. I think it was actually the August-September issue, if I'm not mistaken. So really aligns with the painting of Breonna Taylor by Amy Sherald being on the cover of Vanity Fair. And so also trying to frame and reframe, as Karina noted so well, it's what curators do, so really kind of framing and reframing the Gilliam in multiple ways, not only how it's installed, but also how it's considered in conversation with Amy Sherald.
So speaking of Karina, I have a question for you now, which was one thing you brought up that I really appreciated also was curators as cultural listeners. Now, historically, many curators aren't necessarily considered listeners. And I'm curious how that shift is working in terms of just in general through the field, because I assume your colleagues, some of them, maybe they're all along for the ride, but some of them may not be as open to that. And I'm curious, and I'd love you to just talk a little bit about cultural listening and what that actually means in the process.
Really interesting question, and I'll do my best to answer it. What is a cultural listener? I think the field of design that I operate in is an interesting one because the voice of the author or the maker is so much only part of what these objects are and how they circulate in the world. And museums have often, and very in traditional senses, historical senses, been interested in the processes of making. It's about how design has entered into this sector. But the recognition is that there are many objects of design that are not authored, and we need to think about how they find their place in what is a record of our time. And who do we go to? Often it's the connoisseurial approach of a curator, a depth of knowledge that might be kept in an ivory tower. That's not a means of working that I can empathize with strongly. And how do we find our knowledge? What is expertise? And we've recently engaged in video games as an example at the V&A. And the brilliance of that preservation of field sits well beyond any institution with the amateur enthusiast. An amateur is almost an unfair description. So what we need to do, particularly in the contemporary, and I think in the 21st century, if you look to contemporary art, context is often a medium. And I think for curatorial practice, context is such a vital and ever more important way of thinking about objects, enriching them in the collection. So it's about going out, listening, hearing the voices of those who use these objects, those who subvert these objects, and indeed not to lose sight of the creators and the makers, because they are important too.
Absolutely. So now I wonder, this is a question for all of you, because we're talking about stories and narratives. And I'm wondering if there are any narratives that you encountered again and again, perhaps growing up or during your education or your early years, that you think has actually changed in your field. In that, because we all talk about changing the narratives, we all talk about sort of shifting the conversation. I'm curious if anyone has an example of something they feel has been shifting, that they've seen through in their own work or maybe their career, they have seen a slow shift towards something. And if there's anything that anybody would like to bring up in regards to that.
Elizabeth, I would love to prompt you actually that the performer, that they called him the Black Mozart, but in fact Mozart is the white him. Like that kind of reframing is really fantastic. Can you speak to that in particular?
Yeah. Well, yeah, I mean, it's interesting because when I first encountered the character of Chevalier, I also called him the Black Mozart because I didn't know much about him, and I heard his music, and he's extremely similar to Mozart's symphonies. And when I dug into it, it was clearly that he was maybe 10 years older than him or 10 years before in Paris. And the encounter was in Paris when Mozart decided to conquer the city and decided to maybe try to be a composer at the time. And Chevalier was already working for the court. He was already extremely successful. And, he was gorgeous. He was, had multi-talented. I mean, he was the talk of the town before the revolution. And I think there was something in Mozart that inspired him. And dare I say that I think he was inspired to do his work by Chevalier. So yeah, there is a change now, because we are now understanding, again, there are markers of this time that mark that time, but they're not given the credit. And I think there's going to be a movie made about Chevalier that is going to be directed by a black director, African-American director, and I think also the writer is African-American female, which should be, out soon enough. But I would say also there is a change in, there was this show maybe a couple of years ago called Posing Modernity at the Walla Gallery. And the curator of that show, Denise Murrell, did a fantastic job in doing a lot of research. And there is, I think there was a change in two things I think she's responsible for in a very positive way. First of all was the character of Laure that, was around her exhibition, who is the model in the Olympia of Manet, the one behind, who's, offering the flowers. She was able to find out her name and made it official, which I thought was interesting, because she also said that it didn't require an extensive amount of research. It was just a matter of opening a book downstairs and then flip through some pages, like, oh, there is her name. So, and same thing for this portrait that really shifted the way I saw Black bodies in art, was the portrait of a negress, which exactly said that in the museum, it's a portrait of a negress, and very recently they changed it to the portrait of Madeleine. So they changed her name, they gave her a name. So I would say these things are, quite fundamental, and they're, different times, and hopefully we're going to do better.
Great. So there are a number of educators who are watching this right now, and there have been a number of questions asking, how can educators and teachers specifically foster a sustained dialogue and help students learn how to create meaningful engagement with art? I wonder whether any of you would like to address that. Maybe the curators, or just because I have a feeling you probably have a little bit more experience with that, but of course the question is open to everyone.
I could offer an answer about a meaningful engagement with design, and by that also within the context of the institution. I think I think we as museum professionals across the board need to make that job easier and offer those spaces of encounter with oneself. And that is about a means of communication and information, and whether that's decentering the curatorial voice or indeed centering the user's voice. Those are the choices that we need to make. I think with design, it's easy. If you've got an everyday object that you could, easier in some senses if the mobile phone is in the pocket and you think of that as the chatelaine of today. How do we loop back into history and think about these objects in previous iterations? How can we do it better? By having a broader and more diverse set of voices that enable those conversations and therefore that meaningful engagement.
Great. Alice, you talked about decentering during your presentation. And what is it that we gain from decentering? As well as what do you think is the pushback and the challenge for institutions to decenter?
Yeah, well, I think, we gain a lot from decentering. I mean, there is, I don't even know if I can unpack that in an answer. There's so many ways that this exhibition decentered, so I'll speak to the Speed Museum. In particular, the galleries that Promised Witness Remembrance is held within typically hold the Dutch and Flemish collection, right? So there's a particular thing that is happening with this collection, in that insofar is that it's always there, right? The collection is always undue in these galleries. It's never deinstalled. And also, Black contemporary artists are engaged within these gallery spaces, but typically because of a curatorial intervention, right? So it's not perhaps typical in this kind of encyclopedic approach to exhibiting objects to include artworks that exist outside of this kind of canonical framework unless there's a curatorial intervention. So perhaps deciding to deinstall all of the work becomes such a radical act that it decenters not only the institution, it decenters the values of the institution as we understand them. And it provides an opportunity to recenter another set of values. And then again and again and again, right? And it happened so many times in this exhibition. It happened within the didactics, you know, with Tamika Palmer writing the timeline and making a decision to not explain what was going on, because guess what? Trust your audience. They can read and understand what is happening. And so I think that, you know, I'm going to answer your question, hopefully in this kind of roundabout way, to get to the point of there's many ways to decenter, and there's many ways that this exhibition decentered, and it continues to happen. And the pushback is that, you know, sometimes certain people cannot let go of the authoritative voice or the position of the museum as the, you know, and therefore the curator as the author in that space. But when you call people in and you invite people in, it means that, you know, me as a curator, I was very much decentered also. And I think it's quite humbling. So although there is pushback, it's humbling and it's actually freeing, because it doesn't have to be about the level of intelligence that I have, or the level of research that I've done, or a groundbreaking idea that I'm hoping to bring forth. It becomes all of those things and then something else, or none of that at all. And at the end of the day, it doesn't matter, because it's not about me. And so I think that's the strength of that kind of decentering.
Beautiful answer. I think it's such a great point to bring up also, that sometimes that sort of assertion of authority comes from different places, perhaps even in, you know, so it's I think decentering is such an important conversation. I'm so glad you sort of put it in that context. Elizabeth, you said something that I've been thinking about since you said it, which is sometimes you can, something you makes you realize what is missing, or something you include often makes you realize what is missing. And I wonder if you build on that. And maybe Mariana, you might have some words as well, because I think there's a commonality between both of you in terms of that. Sort of like this naming and placing of something often is also to highlight what is absent. So Elizabeth, I wonder if you could start.
Yeah, sure. Well, I say that in the context of encountering that painting in the Louvre. And I've, you know, my bringing in France and in the art world, I went to art school, and it's essentially very classical, it's European, and you basically raised in that way. It's very rare, you know, I encountered any kind of blackness in the art, I was told. And I think it was my late teens when I first went to the museum, which was a field trip with the class. You know, you go there and you're going to sketch some, you know, old masters things. And I mean, it really hit me like a ton of brick, because I've never seen it before. And the reason why it hit me is because I've never seen it before. And why haven't I seen it before? Because it was nowhere to be found. And just that, and then you feel, and maybe it was echoing for me in a special way, because I'm raised as a French citizen. I am assimilated in that culture. So therefore, whatever I see, I assume it's part of my history, right? But then I realized when I saw it, it was not part of my history. It was almost, I'm not saying it was a sham, I felt like a little bit, you know, I've been fooled. So when I saw that painting, it's just like there was a lot of emotion coming in. And also the shock, because I think I was the only Black person in my class, nobody really paid attention. Also, that was a bit shocking to me. And I'm like, am I the only one seeing this? So then when I saw this painting and the way I reacted to it and the way people was not reacting to it, really made me realize something is missing in this. There's a part missing. And I kind of want to feel it. And I'm not saying I'm going to I'm going to feel it, obviously, because it's a gap that cannot be filled. It's like something is missed, going to miss forever. But it's important to see. It's almost like light and shadow. It's important then, when you see something, you can add something so then it balances out. And really, in a way, I kind of want to balance out with my work. Yeah.
Mariana?
Yeah, that balance out that you just said really goes with kind of my feeling around things that are like, presented and lost or like not seen or just missing, has to do with, I guess, learning. And this might be like I'm gonna go somewhere with this, but like, it's like learning, everyone doesn't learn the same way. And like you say, this is blue, and then it makes you think like, but where's yellow and where's red? And then you're like, well, there's also other colors. And like, sometimes people understand blue through purple because, that's how it works for them. But if you say this is blue, this is blue, this is blue, you can't help that person who understands blue through purple at all without giving a different view or a different shade or a balance to what blue can be. So it's like, I find that like, I can't just say like, oh, sculpture is this, because it's not. As soon as you say it is, there's going to be a bunch of stuff that it's not, that it also isn't, mostly more. And so I think that's my main approach with like presenting dance. Like, okay, here's a moving body, but then it's like, well, what else can this body do? It's not just like a silent body. It could also do a lot of other things. And like, this body can also, use language to help those who can't understand just a body. They need some kind of words, or to help those who through silence understand the severity or gravity of something, or to help those that through music and song, helps them grasp the concept. So I think that maybe it's kind of for me, seeing what's lost and paying attention to it is kind of an attempt to invite people from different angles in. And I don't want to say inclusion, but that's what it is. A little bit like, I want it to be like faceted and like a consortium of ideas that kind of all surround each other and create one, but also that are jumping off points for even more ideas. So in that sense, it's like a way of thinking and learning through imagery and experience.
Great. So I'm going to have one final question before we wrap up. We only have a few minutes left. So feel free, whoever would like to answer. The question for curators is, what would you ask from artists to sort of contribute to this kind of redefining of narratives? And for the artists, what would you ask of curators to help in that process? Because both of you are involved in redefining narratives of sorts. Wondering if anybody is chomping at the bit to answer that. Maybe I've stumped you all. That will be my badge of honor, I guess. Alison, how about you? Can I ask you in terms of, because you're also dealing with contemporary artists that probably have their own perspectives on a lot of these very contemporary issues, and they all have their own different contributions to this. How did you sort of find that common ground with these artists?
Yeah, I appreciate you asking that. I was actually going to jump in and say that, most of the work that I do is redefining narratives, and what I ask is for artists to trust me, because I'm typically working with artists that are left outside of the canon or perhaps siloed, and I don't believe in that kind of approach. And so I actually would offer an answer to your question that perhaps offers a different pitch, right, or a different kind of way to think about this. And it's that perhaps there are people that are doing the work that we all are doing, and they're doing it all the time. And perhaps it's just an opportunity to think about how we consider what a narrative is. So maybe it's, again, and I don't know if that's a succinct answer, but I think the question comes from a certain place, and I might ask that we pull back and decenter that place that the question is being asked from, and then afford that there are people that are doing this work, and it's not about redefining narratives, it's about doing work. And so what I ask from artists is trust, and with regard to the Speed exhibition, I had an incredible amount of trust, which I'm very grateful for.
I think that was a beautiful answer, particularly since I think there are different cultural traditions around what narratives are and how they're organized as well, which is something that I think we don't talk enough about. I just wanted to mention, because you entered it in the chat, but tonight on NBC Nightly News, Lester Holt will be doing an interview with Tamika Palmer at the galleries of the Speed Museum. So I just want to encourage people to check that out, because I think one of the amazing things about Alison's project has been the fact that it really has sort of crossed over outside of the quote unquote traditional art worlds in sort of also speaking to other people. So Karina, I wonder if you had any thoughts in general about the question in terms of working with designers and how you sort of help connect their interest in their own stories, and how you bring them together under the curatorial umbrella.
I'm not sure I can improve on Alison's answer. I think it's a very similar perspective, and it's in some ways to take the curator out of the picture and think about it as a conversation between people and things, and to give the platform to others to enable a different mode of understanding, discourse, debate, and learning, if you want to use those terms. Of course, we as curators have frustrations, designers, artists too, but that's not the place or the space to think about it. I think that question of trust is vital, particularly when seeking to fall without or reach beyond and build different ways of doing.
Great. Well, thank you, all of you, Karina, Mariana, Elizabeth, and Alison. Thank you so much for taking part and engaging with this topic. And I just want to let everyone know the next session is at 3:15, and the topic is interpretation. So we encourage everyone to log on, and thank you again for signing on.